Christmas Eve is the most beautiful and happiest time for each of us, a time to gather with family and friends. But that warm, happy moment seemed not to be for the young girl at the end of the street, a girl with a puppy who could only gaze weakly at the twinkling lights on the Christmas trees. In that somber moment, a former K-9 Navy SEAL walked by. His feet stopped, their eyes met, and without words or actions, he understood what the girl had been through. Neither of them knew that this moment would change all their lives forever. Before we begin, please let me know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. Snow drifted across the narrow streets of North Pine, swirling beneath the amber glow of old Christmas lamps that trembled in the winter wind. Jake Turner moved through the storm with the steady, controlled steps of someone who had once crossed battlefields carved entirely from dust and fire. At 34, Jake carried the shape of a soldier, permanently etched into his posture. Broad shoulders held slightly tense, a jawline cut clean, but shadowed by a short, uneven stubble, and eyes the color of burnt steel, always alert, always measuring. Even in the quietness of this remote mountain town, he scanned corners out of instinct, not habit. Shadow, his 6-year-old German Shepherd, walked close at his heel, a lean and powerful creature with a dark sable coat, sharp ears always lifted, and a gaze that mirrored Jake's, watchful, assessing, prepared for the unpredictable. Jake had moved to North Pine 2 years prior, seeking the kind of silence that didn't exist in cities, hoping that distance could dull the memories of the desert, memories of a partner he couldn't save, and a mission no one liked to speak about. The military had trained him to endure anything except the weight of guilt. Since then, Shadow had been the anchor keeping him from drifting too far into the kind of solitude that eats men alive. Shadow nudged him when the nightmares grew heavy, stood guard when Jake's breathing turned shallow, and, more than once, dragged him out of moments where the world felt too thin to carry him. Tonight, Jake forced himself into town because he needed supplies before the snowfall worsened. Shadow's steps left crisp patterns behind them as they passed the bakery, the antique store, the little diner where townsfolk usually gathered. But on Christmas Eve, most businesses had already closed early, leaving North Pine nearly deserted. The snow muffled every sound, making the entire world feel as fragile as breath on a cold window. That was when Shadow slowed, nose lifting, body tightening the way it had on patrol routes overseas. Jake felt the shift immediately. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice low, steady, trained not to disturb the air. Shadow moved toward the alley beside the old post office. Jake followed, senses sharpening, expecting to find a stray animal or maybe someone drunk after a holiday party. What he did not expect was the sight of a young woman huddled beneath a flickering street lamp, her back pressed against a frozen bench, as though the world had pushed her there and walked away. She couldn't have been more than 30. Her build was slim but hardened by exhaustion, shoulders curled inward from days of carrying more fear than weight. She wore a worn green coat too thin for the weather, her jeans stained with old travel dust, and her boots mismatched, one cracked at the heel. Snow caught in her long, dark blonde hair, tangled from wind, framing a face that might have been soft and warm in other circumstances, but was now pale with cold and sleeplessness. Beneath trembling lashes, her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, held a kind of sadness Jake recognized instantly. He had seen it in soldiers who had run out of safe places to stand. In her arms, curled tightly against her chest, was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, his fur black with tan paws, his ears too small to stand, Trembling so violently, Jake felt the shiver from where he stood. The puppy whined again, a thin, desperate sound. Shadow approached cautiously, lowering his head, tail neutral, sensing distress rather than threat. Jake knelt beside the woman, letting his voice soften. "You shouldn't be out in this cold. Are you hurt?" She startled as though pulled from a nightmare. For a brief second, she looked ready to run, but the storm behind her and the fear in her posture told him she had nowhere left to go. I'm fine," she whispered, though her cracked lips and stiff fingers said otherwise. "I just need a minute." Jake studied her carefully, not with the cold scrutiny of interrogation, but with the patient curiosity of someone who knew people broke quietly long before they fell apart. "I'm Jake," he offered, not pushing further. "This is Shadow. He's friendly unless someone gives him a reason not to be." Shadow sniffed the puppy gently. The pup nudged closer, seeking warmth and safety, the same way the woman seemed to shrink from danger, yet yearn for help. The woman swallowed. "I'm Emma Collins, and this little guy, his name is Milo." Her voice trembled when she said it, not from cold, but from something deeper. Fear, worn with days of running. Jake saw the signs, sudden glances over her shoulder, body flinching at distant sounds, fingers gripping the puppy protectively as though someone might rip him away. Jake straightened slowly, softening his tone even further. "Emma, it's below freezing. Milo won't make it through the night like this, and neither will you." Her eyes filled with a quiet panic. "I can't go anywhere. I'm not safe. And if they find me—" She stopped, biting her lip hard, as though she had already said too much. Jake didn't press. In missions, trust wasn't taken. It was offered when someone was desperate enough to surrender fear for survival. "Come to my cabin," he said finally. "It's warm. Shadow won't let anyone get near you. You're safer with us than out here." Emma hesitated, her breathing quickening. She clutched Milo closer, and the puppy let out a soft, exhausted cry. Jake saw her resolve crack in the moment she heard it. "Please," he added quietly. "It's Christmas Eve. No one should be alone out here." The words hit her harder than he intended. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears, then nodded once, small, reluctant, hopeful. As she rose, Jake steadied her. She was lighter than he expected, as though hunger and fear had carved away what little strength she had left. Shadow walked ahead, guiding them out of the alley, occasionally glancing back to ensure they followed. As they moved through the falling snow, Emma finally spoke, her voice barely louder than the wind. "I didn't come here by accident. I've been running for 3 days. I used to work for a company that claimed to be rescuing exotic animals, but they were selling them instead, and much worse. I found proof, USB files. They wanted it back." Jake kept his gaze forward, but his jaw tightened. "Did you go to the police?" Her laugh was thin and hollow. "Some of the officers were on their payroll. When I tried, someone showed up at my apartment before the officers did. I ran. I didn't know where else to go." Jake exhaled slowly, a habit he'd learned to calm the sharp edge of adrenaline. He knew corruption. He knew how far men would go to protect their secrets. He also knew what it meant to carry evidence that could cost someone millions. He glanced at Emma again, at the exhaustion clouding her features, the bruised trust in her eyes, the trembling puppy fighting sleep in her arms. "You're safe now," he said, and though he rarely made promises, he meant this one. "Whatever you're running from, we'll figure it out." Emma didn't answer, but the way her shoulders eased just slightly beneath the snowfall told him she believed him. Or maybe she needed to believe him. As they reached the shadowed road leading to Jake's cabin, Shadow barked once, a short, sharp warning toward the dark tree line. Jake scanned the woods, instincts flaring, but saw nothing through the dense curtain of snow. Still, the back of his neck prickled. Something had followed them, or someone, but he didn't say it. Not yet. Emma was already carrying enough fear for 2 lifetimes. When the cabin lights came into view, a warm glow cutting through the storm, Emma exhaled shakily, as if the sight alone was enough to keep her standing. And Jake, watching her silhouette soften under that warm glow, sensed, without understanding why, that this Christmas Eve would mark the beginning of a battle he had never expected to fight again, and a bond he had never expected to need. The walk to the cabin took longer than usual because Emma moved slowly, each step careful on the icy trail, her arms locked protectively around Milo as if she feared the storm or the world itself might steal him away. Jake walked slightly ahead, Shadow close at his side, glancing back every few seconds to make sure Emma was still upright. The snowfall grew heavier, flakes drifting in thick sheets that blurred the outline of the tree line, turning the woods into a shifting wall of white. When the cabin finally appeared, a sturdy wooden structure tucked beneath dark pine boughs, it seemed like an island carved out of warmth and survival. Jake pushed open the door, letting Emma step inside first. Heat from the old wood stove washed across the room, and Emma inhaled sharply, the tension in her shoulders loosening as if warmth alone was a kind of mercy. Shadow walked in last, circling the living room before settling between Emma and the door, instinctively positioning himself as both guardian and judge. Jake watched her take in the place. A modest but carefully kept cabin with pinewood walls, sparse but sturdy furniture, and shelves stacked neatly with supplies, gear, and a few small reminders of a life before everything fell apart. The photos on the mantel caught her eye. Jake with other seal handlers, and one picture of a younger Jake kneeling beside a muscular, sand-coated shepherd with proud, bright eyes. She stepped closer. "Your old partner?" she asked softly. Jake paused, his voice lowering, barely audible above the crackle of the stove. "Yeah, his name was Odin." Emma didn't push for details, though she sensed a story as heavy as grief behind the calm tone. Instead, she shifted Milo carefully and knelt near the stove to warm him. Up close, Milo's condition was clearer: thin frame, small breaths, paw pads raw from walking in ice, and fur damp from melting snow. But his eyes, though tired, held a stubborn spark of loyalty for the woman holding him. Jake knelt beside them, opening a small medical kit. "May I?" Emma nodded, and Jake gently examined Milo. His touch was careful, steady, a balance of strength and tenderness shaped by years of treating working dogs in far worse conditions. Milo whimpered, but didn't pull away. Shadow approached and sniffed the puppy's ear, giving a soft, approving huff before lying down nearby. Emma exhaled, relieved. "He trusts you," she whispered. Jake made a quiet sound, not quite a laugh. "Shadow doesn't trust easily these days. If he's calm, that says something." Emma hesitated, then finally allowed herself to sit back against the sofa, exhaustion catching up to her in waves. Her face was pale under the warm cabin light, but the soft hazel of her eyes seemed clearer now, less clouded by fear. Jake noticed the subtle tremble in her hands, not from cold anymore, but from weeks of running and the sudden shock of safety. Safety sometimes hit harder than danger. It forced people to feel again. He heated broth on the stove, and when he gave the warm cup to Emma, her fingers brushed his. The touch was fleeting but real enough to send a small jolt through both of them. "Thank you," she murmured, staring into the steam. I didn't expect kindness from a stranger tonight." Jake sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Sometimes strangers are the only ones willing to help." Emma's gaze dropped to Milo. "You really think he'll be okay?" "With warmth and rest, yes," Jake said. "But I want to take him to the town vet tomorrow, just to make sure." That comment introduced someone new into the story sooner than Emma expected. "A vet?" Jake nodded. "Dr. Harold Bennett, older guy, kind, gray beard, glasses always crooked, talks to animals like they're his grandkids. He's the one everyone in town trusts." The image of a gentle elderly vet seemed to settle something in Emma. Her voice steadied a little, but as the comfort of the cabin wrapped around her, another kind of weight settled in, the burden of secrets she could no longer outrun. She looked up at Jake, and he recognized the look instantly. Soldiers had it when they were ready to talk about the nightmare no one knew they carried. "Jake, there's something you should know." Her voice cracked once, but she forced herself to continue. "My old boss, he knows I took the USB, and he knows I ran. He has people looking for me, and the files, they're bad. Names, dates, transport routes, even drop points near this area." Jake's jaw tightened. "Here?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "One of the locations is listed as North Pine Transfer Unit. I didn't even know where North Pine was until I fled here by bus. I thought it was just a remote town. But now—" She shook her head, panic flickering through her expression again. Jake leaned back, slowly, processing the information. A cold weight settled in his chest, different from the winter chill. Shadow lifted his head, sensing the change, ears pinning forward. "Emma," Jake said, voice calm but firm, "you're telling me the people you ran from could be operating near this town, using the forest as a transfer point?" She nodded. Milo whimpered at the tension in her voice. Jake exhaled deeply. "Then we're dealing with something bigger than just a frightened woman on the run." Emma hugged Milo tighter. "I didn't want to bring danger to anyone. I swear I didn't. I just didn't know where else to go." Jake shook his head. "You did the right thing coming here, and you're not alone anymore." Emma looked at him, searching his expression for any sign of judgment. Instead, she found certainty, quiet, unshakable certainty. "But why help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Jake hesitated, then spoke with a heaviness that made the air between them thicken. "Because once, someone asked for my help, and I didn't get there in time. It wasn't a story. It was a wound." Shadow pressed gently against Jake's knee, as if grounding him. Emma nodded slowly, understanding enough to respect the boundary of silence. The wind outside howled again, brushing snow against the cabin walls. For a moment, the storm sounded like distant voices, echoes of past battles Jake hadn't forgiven himself for. Emma set Milo down gently on a blanket Jake provided. The puppy curled into a ball, breathing more steadily now. When Emma finally looked around the room again, her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed before, a muddy boot print near the front door that was not theirs. She pointed. "Jake, was someone here before us?" Jake stood instantly, his posture shifting into that sharp, predatory alertness she had seen only glimpses of before. He knelt, studying the boot print, his expression tightening. "This print isn't mine, and it's fresh." Shadow stood instantly, hackles lifting. Emma's breath hitched. "Do you think they found me already?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He moved to the nearest window, scanning the dark tree line where snow fell silently over the forest. "Not yet," he said finally, but someone was watching the cabin. Emma wrapped her arms around herself again, fear sinking deep into her bones. Jake turned to her, his voice steadier than she felt. "You'll sleep here tonight? I'll reinforce the doors and stay awake for the first watch. Shadow will alert us if anything moves. You're safe for now." Emma looked at him as though clinging to his certainty. "Jake, thank you." He nodded once, tightening the lock with a final click. "This isn't just your fight anymore, Emma. It's ours." Outside, the storm raged on, blanketing the world in a fragile silence. Inside the cabin, beneath the whispering pines, two strangers, bound by fear, circumstance, and a trembling puppy, began the first night of a battle neither of them yet understood. The storm eased by morning, leaving a pale shimmer of frost on the pine needles outside Jake's cabin. Light filtered weakly through the windows, but the air held the brittle coldness of a world still waiting for the next blow. Jake stood near the stove, arms crossed over his chest, watching Emma as she helped Milo lap warm water from a shallow bowl. She looked better than the night before, less pale, less fragile, but still carried the stiffness of someone who had slept with fear curled beside her. Her dark blonde hair was tied loosely, falling over one shoulder in tangled waves, and faint shadows lingered beneath her hazel eyes. She smiled weakly when Milo yawned, but the smile didn't reach all the way through. Jake recognized that look. He had worn it once after deployment, shaken, but pretending to be whole. He set a mug of tea beside her. "We need to go into town," he said. Emma nodded, stroking Milo's fur. "I should try to find work, something temporary. I can't keep relying on you." Her voice held a quiet pride, the kind found in people who learned early in life that asking for help often came with a price. Jake understood. "You're not relying on me," he said simply. "You're surviving. That's different." They bundled up, with Milo tucked inside Emma's coat for warmth, his tiny head peeking out like a curious ember in the cold. Shadow walked ahead of them, his body taut and scanning, as if still remembering the boot print Jake had found last night. He hadn't slept. Jake doubted he ever would again until the threat was gone. North Pine looked deceptively peaceful that morning. Smoke curling from chimneys, townsfolk brushing snow off steps, Christmas wreaths hanging crookedly on doors. The air smelled faintly of pine resin and wood smoke, yet Jake felt an undercurrent shifting beneath the calm, a tension he recognized the way soldiers recognized rumblings before an ambush. The cafe sat on the corner of Main Street, a small place with fogged windows and a tinkling bell above the door. Inside, warmth and the scent of cinnamon drifted through the air. A young woman behind the counter brightened when she saw Jake. "Morning, Jake," she said. She was Sarah Wilkins, around 26, with freckles scattered across her cheeks, a round, friendly face, and auburn curls pulled into a messy bun. Sarah had the energy of someone who refused to let winter or life dampen her spirit. Her brown eyes shone with curiosity when she noticed Emma. "Who's your friend?" Jake nodded toward Emma. "Emma's new in town. She's looking for temporary work." Sarah's brows lifted, scanning Emma with a welcoming but quick, practical gaze. Someone used to evaluating strangers, but too kind to judge harshly. "We could use extra hands for the holiday crowd," she said. And you look like someone who knows how to work hard. Emma straightened a little, grateful. Thank you. I can start today. Sarah smiled, warmly. Then welcome to Pine Brew Cafe. As Emma followed Sarah toward the back to get an apron, Milo wiggled lightly inside her coat, and Sarah let out a soft laugh. You've got a helper, she said. We allow emotional support puppies. Jake sat by the window with Shadow lying at his feet. He was about to sip his coffee when the cafe bell jingled again. A man entered, a stranger Jake hadn't seen before. Tall, lean, his winter coat coated with fresh snow. His features were angular, with a thin, straight nose, sharp cheekbones, and dark gray stubble shadowing a narrow jaw. His hair was black, cut short, but messy, and his eyes, cold, assessing, moved across the cafe like someone scanning for a target. Something in him was wrong. Not a single gesture was casual. He carried an air of silent aggression, the kind found in hired men who had seen violence from too close. Jake watched without moving, though every nerve tightened. Shadow lifted his head, ears angling forward, a low rumble building in his chest. The man approached the counter where Sarah stood. Mornin', she said pleasantly. Coffee? Maybe later. His voice was rough, gravelly, as if unused to casual conversations. I'm looking for someone. Jake's eyes sharpened. Sarah tilted her head politely. Who? The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph. Too quickly, too confidently. A woman, about 30, blonde, traveling with a puppy. You seen her? Sarah blinked, confused. No, can't say I have. We get travelers sometimes, but... Jake saw the tension in Emma's shoulders from across the cafe. She had frozen mid-step in the kitchen doorway, half hidden behind a rack of clean mugs. Milo squirmed in her coat, sensing her fear. The man tucked the photo back into his coat with barely concealed impatience. If she comes by, you'll tell me. A command, not a question. Sarah stiffened slightly. I don't give out information about customers. Town policy. The man's eyes narrowed with annoyance, but he forced a smile that looked more like a thin cut forming across his lips. Sure, thanks. He turned to leave. As he passed Jake's table, his gaze slid toward Shadow, still rumbling softly. Nice dog, the man muttered. Jake responded without looking away. He doesn't like threats. The man's smile faltered. He left the cafe without another word. Shadow growled until the door shut. Jake stood, feeling the shift in the air. Emma emerged slowly, clutching Milo. Jake, she whispered, that's one of them. I know, he said softly. He wasn't subtle. They left the cafe quickly, once Sarah promised Emma the job would be waiting for her the next day. North Pine suddenly felt smaller, its streets narrower, and every shadow seemed deeper than before. Jake led Emma down the back road toward his truck. We need to check something, he said. Back at the cabin, Jake pulled out the USB Emma carried in a silver chain around her neck. He inserted it into his secured laptop. A list opened. Routes, inventory logs, names, dates, and at the bottom, a signature Jake recognized instantly. Maxwell Granger. The name hit him like a blow to the chest. Granger had been the handler of an international smuggling ring, a ghost to authorities, a monster to anyone who tried to expose him, and the reason Odin, Jake's first K9 partner, had died after an ambush designed to silence a witness. Emma saw the change in Jake's face. Jake, you know him? Jake's voice hardened. He killed my partner. Shadow nudged Jake's leg gently, sensing his rising tension. Jake clenched a slow breath. Emma, this isn't just evidence. This USB can bring down Granger entirely. Emma's eyes widened, but she nodded, resolve glinting through the fear. "Then we have to take it to someone who isn't corrupt." Jake nodded. "The nearest trustworthy unit is the FBI field office across the county line. We'll go as soon as the roads open." But before they could plan further, Shadow suddenly sprang to his feet, ears pointed toward the window. A sharp chemical scent drifted in through a thin draft, the unmistakable bitter tang of animal-grade sedative. Milo whined, burying his face against Emma. Jake grabbed his coat. "Someone's been around the cabin again." Emma's breath hitched. "Jake, are they trying to take Milo?" "They're trying to take you," he corrected, voice low. "And Milo is leverage." Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin walls like a warning. The sky darkened with heavy clouds, another blizzard rising over the mountains. Jake locked the door, securing every latch. "Tomorrow we run," he said. "Tonight we survive." Emma held Milo tight as shadows deepened beyond the windows, and Jake silently prayed that the storm would be the only thing they had to fear before dawn arrived. The blizzard thickened until the forest vanished into a wall of white, and the wind carried a low, mournful howl that made the trees creak like old bones. Snow hammered the ground so hard it blurred footprints faster than they formed. It wasn't a night meant for travel or choices made in panic, yet desperation sometimes pushed people beyond reason. Emma had been pacing the cabin, Milo trembling weakly inside her coat, when the fever seemed to spike again. His eyes glazed, his tiny chest rising too fast. She whispered, "I'll be quick. Jake won't even notice I'm gone." And with a fragile courage born of fear, she slipped out into the storm. But the moment she reached the tree line, silhouettes materialized, 3 men moving with the sharp precision of predators who had been waiting. She didn't even have time to scream before a gloved hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her backward. Milo squealed as he was ripped from her arms. The men bundled her into a dark SUV, its headlights muted by the swirling snow. The vehicle vanished into the storm before Jake even realized she was gone. When he stepped back inside the cabin and saw the back door cracked open, something inside him snapped with chilling clarity. "Emma!" His voice echoed sharply against the walls. Milo's blanket lay abandoned near the stove. Outside, faint tracks led into the white void. Jake didn't hesitate. He hit the emergency seal beacon clipped to his vest, a small military-grade device that blasted a compressed distress signal across encrypted rescue channels, used only in situations where lives were measured in minutes. Then he grabbed his pack, tightened his gloves, and whispered, "Shadow, find her." The dog lowered his head, scenting the wind, then darted into the blizzard with Jake close behind. The SUV plowed through the storm until it rolled to a stop before an abandoned warehouse, slumped beneath the weight of decades-old snow. Rust hung on its metal siding, the color of dried blood. Inside, lanterns cast ugly pools of yellow light over rows of metal cages stacked haphazardly, each cage holding whimpering puppies bred or stolen for transport. The air smelled of urine, cold metal, rubber gloves, and fear. Emma was dragged inside and strapped to a metal chair with industrial zip ties. Her breath came in frantic bursts, her skin pale beneath strands of snow-dampened blonde hair. Milo had been shoved into a crate on a nearby table, his tiny body pressed against the bars as he cried for her. Then a man stepped from the shadows. Tall, sharply built, with a black winter coat trimmed in fox fur. His hair, black streaked with silver, was combed back neatly, revealing hard cheekbones and a jaw cut with ruthless angles. His steel blue eyes held no warmth, only clinical interest. His gloved fingers twirled the stolen USB drive as if it were a trivial trinket. Maxwell Granger, the man whose order had led to Odin's death years ago. The ghost Jake had never expected to face again. Granger approached Emma slowly, his voice smooth and cultured. "My dear, you should have stayed hidden. Stealing from me was bold and very inconvenient." Emma clenched her jaw. "Those animals don't belong to you. They're not products." Granger sighed, as if tired of explaining morality to children. "Everything in this world belongs to someone. I simply decide who pays." Before Emma could retort, a metallic clang echoed from the far side of the warehouse. One of the guards stepped outside to investigate, then silence. A moment later, a second guard frowned and moved toward the door. Still, no response. Granger's eyes narrowed. "Check it," he ordered. But just as the remaining man reached the entrance, the door exploded inward. Shadow lunged out of the white storm like a living weapon, smashing into the guard's torso with such force the man collapsed instantly. Shadow locked onto his arm, dragging him down before he could grab the rifle at his side. The lights flickered, snow blew inside in swirling gusts, and from the storm stepped Jake, face shadowed, movement controlled, eyes burning with a deadly calm. He scanned the room once, taking in Emma, Milo, the cages, the guards, then Granger. Emma whispered, "Jake." "Stay down," he answered, voice steady but edged with steel. One of the henchmen charged Jake with a metal pipe. Jake dodged the first swing, caught the man's wrist, twisted hard until bone cracked, then shoved him into a stack of cages. A second rushed him with a stun baton, sparks hissing through the cold air. Jake struck low, sweeping the man's legs, then slammed him into the concrete floor. Shadow tore across the room toward another guard, trying to reach his weapon. The dog collided with him mid-step, knocking him flat. Granger stepped backward, composed even under attack. "You never were smart enough to stay dead, Turner. And you never learned when to surrender," Jake said coldly. Another guard tried to restrain Emma, but she twisted violently, tipping the chair. It crashed sideways, rattling across the floor. The impact loosened the zip tie enough for her to force her wrists free, using the jagged edge of a broken crate. She scrambled to Milo, ripping open the latch and pulling him close. He whimpered but lifted his head weakly. Emma turned to the nearest cage tower and grabbed a crowbar lying beside it. "Come on, babies," she whispered as she smashed the first lock. Puppies scrambled out, some skittering across the floor in fear, others clinging to her ankles. She moved from cage to cage, freeing as many as she could. Gunfire cracked. Jake dove behind a support pillar as Granger fired. The bullet ricocheted off concrete, sparks spraying. Jake knew Granger wasn't shooting to kill, not yet. Men like him preferred to savor suffering. But then a new sound pierced. The warehouse, a deep mechanical hum from above, followed by a sharp electronic chirp. A police thermal surveillance drone. Its rotating camera cast a red grid across the warehouse as it hovered. Jake felt a surge of relief. His beacon signal had reached someone. Outside, sirens wailed faintly through the storm, growing louder. Granger cursed under his breath. "Move the product," he barked. His men scrambled, but the drone fired a blinding strobe pulse, causing them to duck instinctively. Snow blasted inward again as the warehouse doors were kicked open by the county tactical team. 3 officers in white winter camo, rifles raised. The lead officer, a tall woman with dark skin and braided hair named Lieutenant Harper Davis, shouted, "Hands where we can see them! Now!" Her presence was commanding. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, the stance of someone who had faced cartel fire and lived to brief about it. Her team stormed in, disarming the remaining guards in seconds. Granger attempted to slip toward the back exit, but Shadow intercepted him with a furious snarl, forcing him backward into the officer's line of sight. Harper aimed directly at him. "On your knees, Granger." For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Jake rushed to Emma. She knelt on the cold floor, Milo wrapped in her arms, tears streaming down her wind-burned cheeks. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Jake." He knelt beside her. Shadow pressed against them, tail low, breath steaming in the cold. And in that moment, as officers secured the warehouse, as puppies whimpered in relief, as Granger was hauled away, Emma threw her arms around Jake and sobbed into his chest. Snow swirled through the broken doorway like falling stars, and Christmas Eve settled quietly around them. They had survived, together. Dawn broke with a pale, washed-out glow over North Pine, the kind of fragile winter light that shimmered across the snow like a promise that the storm had finally loosened its grip. The warehouse raid was only hours behind them, yet it already felt like something from another lifetime. Jake stood outside the precinct building, snow crunching beneath his boots as he watched officers escort Maxwell Granger and his men into armored vehicles. Even with their hands cuffed, their faces bruised and defeated, Jake didn't allow himself even a moment of triumph. Justice wasn't victory. It was simply overdue. Shadow sat alert beside him, fur brushed with frost, amber eyes sharp as he scanned the scene. Milo, wrapped in a soft blue blanket Emma held tightly, peeked out occasionally, giving small, sleepy whimpers that made her squeeze him closer. Emma's face was still pale, marked by exhaustion and bruises from the night before, but her hazel eyes held a quiet light, something like relief, but also disbelief that she was still standing. Lieutenant Harper Davis approached them, clipboard tucked under her arm. Up close in the clear morning light, she looked every bit the seasoned officer she was. Tall, athletic build, dark skin glowing against the pale backdrop, braided hair pulled back tight, jawline firm but kind. Her steady, unshaken demeanor radiated from her like a grounding force. "Jake Turner," Harper said, stopping a few feet away. "You may not realize it yet, but what you did last night saved more than just this town." She shifted her gaze to Emma. "And you, Miss Collins, your courage in coming forward, especially with evidence that incriminated the people hunting you, is the reason this entire ring is going to prison." Emma swallowed, fingers trembling around Milo's blanket. I couldn't let them keep hurting animals." Harper softened. "That may be true, but you also risked everything. That matters." She handed Emma a document with the official seal. "You're now under protected witness status. The FBI will handle the paperwork, but until then, you'll have support from the North Pine Sheriff's Office and my team." Emma nodded, overwhelmed. Harper then turned to Jake with a raised eyebrow. "And you," her voice dipped into a slightly amused tone. "I have a proposal." Jake crossed his arms, expression guarded but curious. "Let me guess. You want me to fill out a civilian consultant form?" Harper smirked. "Oh, I want much more than that." She handed him a folder thick with forms and maps. "We've been trying to develop a K-9 search and rescue program for years. Our winters are brutal, our terrain unforgiving. But after what I saw last night, after watching you and your dog fight through that storm like you were born from it, I think you're the only person in this county who can make it real." Shadow wagged his tail proudly, leaning into Jake's leg as if casting his own vote. Jake studied the folder, jaw tightening with memories. Odin, the missions, the battlefield ghosts that still clung to him. But something shifted inside him. For the first time, the idea didn't feel like stepping backward. It felt like stepping forward. "I'll think about it," he said. Harper smirked. "That's the closest thing you've given to a yes. I'll take it." The next week passed in a gentle blur of healing, paperwork, and surprising opportunities. Emma was invited to the town's small animal rescue center, Pine Haven Sanctuary, a modest building near the creek, run by a middle-aged couple, the Parkers. Lydia Parker, the wife, had a warm face framed by straight silver hair, soft lines at the corners of her eyes, and a voice that carried the calm of someone who had spent her life comforting frightened creatures. Her husband, Mark Parker, tall with a weathered beard and kind blue eyes, was quieter but steady, moving with the practiced patience of someone who rarely rushed anything. They welcomed Emma with genuine gratitude for exposing the smuggling ring. "We've had animals disappearing for months," Lydia said as she gently stroked Milo's head during his checkup. "You helped us stop something terrible." She offered Emma a full-time position on the spot. "We need someone with heart more than experience, and you have both." Emma accepted with tears in her eyes. Meanwhile, Jake visited the sheriff's office every other day, reviewing maps with Harper, meeting field officers, and sketching early outlines for the K-9 program. Officers greeted Shadow with scratches and admiration. Shadow walked with proud confidence, aware of his new importance. Jake found himself unexpectedly drawn into the rhythm of community again, something he had long convinced himself he didn't deserve. A few days later, on a quiet morning warmed by sunlight glinting off fresh snow, Emma made a choice. She didn't want to keep living out of borrowed rooms in the sheriff's safe house. She wanted something real, something close to the people and dogs who saved her. And so she found a small cabin at the foot of the hill where Jake lived, tucked between two slender pines with a chimney that puffed just a little smoke and a porch that creaked softly under the weight of winter. It was old, but Jake inspected it for her, checking the beams, patching the roof, and reinforcing the windows. "It's a good place," he said after testing the lock. "Quiet. Safe." Emma smiled softly. "It feels like somewhere I can breathe again." Milo, already much stronger, explored the porch with wobbling enthusiasm while Shadow watched over him like a stern older brother. From that day on, the path between the two cabins stayed marked in the snow by new footprints, small ones and large ones, human and canine. 1 year passed, a year of healing, a year of training, a year of building something new. North Pine transformed in small but steady ways. The town's K-9 search and rescue program grew under Jake's leadership, attracting volunteers and even sponsorship from nearby counties, impressed by early success. Shadow became the unit's respected senior dog, demonstrating tracking drills with calm authority. Milo grew into an energetic young German shepherd, lean, tan and black fur, bright amber eyes full of mischief, and an unbreakable bond with Shadow. Emma flourished at the sanctuary. The puppies she rescued that night had long since found new homes, but she continued helping new animals recover, her gentle strength becoming a cornerstone of Pine Haven. She found her voice again, her confidence, her joy. And she found it in quiet moments, pouring warm water into bowls, mending a kennel door, teaching Milo to sit, laughing with Lydia over spilled dog food. And throughout the year, she and Jake grew too, toward each other, without forcing it, without naming it, just steady, patient closeness. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after everything, they gathered once more at Jake's cabin. Snow curled softly through the air, falling in slow, peaceful flakes outside the windows. Inside, a fire burned warm in the stone hearth. Shadow and Milo lay curled together near the flames, tails overlapping like old friends who had survived something that bound them forever. Emma stood beside Jake on the porch, bundled in a deep green winter coat. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hazel eyes reflecting the soft glow of lantern light. She smiled, warm, grateful, full of a quiet joy. "Jake," she whispered, breath fogging in the air. "Thanks to you, my life started again." Jake looked at her for a long moment, at the peace on her face, at Milo sleeping safely inside, at the home she had built on the same hill where he once believed he would grow old alone. He exhaled slowly. "Emma, you saved me too." The night deepened, snow continued to fall gently, and for the first time in years, Jake felt the weight on his chest lift, not because the world got easier, but because he no longer carried it alone. They weren't bound by blood. They weren't bound by obligation. They were bound because they chose to be, through courage, kindness, and the salvation found in one another. A family built by survival and love. A new beginning born on Christmas Eve. In the end, Jake, Emma, Shadow, and little Milo remind us of something simple yet profound. No one heals alone. Sometimes the family we build is stronger than the one we're born into. In a world that can feel cold, unfair, or overwhelming, small acts of courage and kindness can reconnect us to hope. Like Jake stepping out of the shadows, or Emma daring to trust again, we too rebuild our lives by choosing compassion, by letting others in, and by refusing to give up, even when the storm is at its worst. And maybe that is the true miracle of everyday life. Every time we help someone stand, we rise a little higher ourselves. Every rescued animal, every person who chooses empathy over fear, every stranger who becomes family, we shape a brighter world, one choice at a time.